What are you doing, dude? We gotta do gear tasting.
What? I'm trying to figure out ballistic coefficient. It's driving me insane. Hey guys, welcome to Gear Tasting. Today I'm going to start with questions over coffee today because we've got 3 questions that all really tie in together. So today's episode, in lieu of just being kind of a gear focus and then some questions, I think the questions really lend themselves well to exploring a couple of different things that I have on the table here. So I'm going to start right off with it. So Michael on Facebook asks, I went with the LWRC M6A2 and butchered it to fall within New Jersey's ridiculous gun laws. The A2 flash hider is gone, and I went with the Landtac Dragon compensator. Any feedback on that? So first of all, I had to look up New Jersey's gun laws because I was pretty unfamiliar with all the ins and outs of them. So I'll talk a little bit about them here because I have them printed out. So you have to have a compensator or a flash hider in New Jersey because a semi-automatic rifle can't have the ability to accept a detachable magazine and have at least 2 of the following: a folding or telescoping stock, a pistol grip that protrudes conspicuously beneath the action of the weapon, very conspicuous, a bayonet mount, a flash suppressor or threaded barrel designed to accommodate a flash suppressor, and a grenade launcher. Layman's terms, obviously you went with the compensator, so that's what we're talking about here. I don't have any experience with the Landtac Dragon compensator, but I do like Battle Comp a lot. That's what I have on this rifle. This is a Battle Comp, I think it's the 1.5, because I had to get this permanently welded on this rifle to make it the 16 inches where I didn't have to SBR the lower. So that's kind of the gist of that. If you want to Form 1 it, there's nothing wrong with that, but when I did this build a couple years ago on ITS for this 14.5, it was kind of a proof of concept. I wanted to really walk through how to put together a really reliable AR for a specific amount of money, as well as document the process. And I wanted to make that kind of available to everybody, so I didn't want to require a Form 1 on the build I was showing how to do, so that's why I went with that. And I love it. It's I haven't had any problems with it. It's been one of the most reliable ARs I own, and I've got about 5 or 6 of them now, and I keep coming back to this 14.5 with the permanently welded Battle Comp. I think the Battle Comp is a fantastic compensator, and I can't say enough good things about it. Like I said, though, I don't have any feedback on the Landtac Dragon compensator. I've never used it, so unfortunately, I don't have anything to say much about that. But we took a poll here at ITS headquarters, and we have all decided unanimously that you should move out of New Jersey, so it is what it is. I know sometimes it's not really feasible, but hey, gun laws are terrible there, obviously. So you have a 2-part question too, so also I know this is going to be a big debate. Should I go with Aimpoint or EoTech, the dreaded Aimpoint versus EoTech question, or do you have another optic I should be looking at? We talked last episode about the ACOG, and I had a lot of questions about why I didn't like the ACOG, and I'll get into that question next. I fully intend on explaining myself with that. But the Aimpoint versus EoTech conversation comes down to some shadiness on the part of EoTech that they got called out on by the government. So the government actually had a lawsuit against EoTech. They settled for somewhere in the neighborhood of $262 million or $265 or something like that. No, it was 25.6 million, sorry. But at any rate, the issue was that the EoTech wasn't holding a 0. So in extreme temperatures, the EoTech would not hold a 0. And despite, I guess, them bringing that up to EoTech, they still kind of pushed the fact that there wasn't anything wrong with it. There was a huge debacle. Soldier Systems covered it really well. If you're interested in really finding out the details of that, I'll put the link to the Soldier Systems article. Eric wrote a really good write-up on what was going on and followed it as the issue progressed, so to speak. And in the end, EoTech wound up enabling everybody that wanted to get a refund or exchange their EoTech to send that in. So that's still active. I'll put the link to that too. So if you have an EoTech and you don't like the fact that it doesn't hold a 0 correctly, you can send it in and get a refund for it too. So the temperature range that I think that its EoTech claims to be is like a -40 to 122 is kind of the craziness of the temperature range. I know that's their range. I don't know at what extreme temperatures that was happening at, but I mean, here in Texas, it can get to 120 in a car. So that's kind of a big issue if your optic is not holding a zero. And that's the optic itself. I would recommend highly the LaRue quick detach mounts. I'm not really sure what the actual nomenclature for this is that I have on my Aimpoint here, but I really like these a lot. They have a little locking bar that goes on there, and they hold zero really well. That's the mount. That's separate from what was happening with the EoTech, but just to kind of talk about that, since I have the guns out here too, since I have my guns out, the 14.5 that I have has that T1 on the top, and I've never had a problem with the LaRue mount, but the ACOG that I talked about last time, this is the built-in mount that the ACOG came with, and it's a piece of junk, honestly. And I say that not because it doesn't work, it's because that I was zeroing the other day at 100. I haven't shot this rifle in probably 2 or 3 years and wanted to check my zero, and found myself having issues. I put down the rifle, reloaded a magazine, came back to the bench where I was shooting the 100 at, and found that I wasn't even on the paper anymore. So found out that it was the mount that had come loose, and obviously you should torque stuff down, but my buddy had a torque screwdriver, and I was lucky enough to have that there, and I torqued this down really well and didn't have any more issues. But that being said, a good mount is important, especially when you're trying to zero an optic and things like that too, so that's just something to keep in mind. And I'll link to the LaRue mounts too, because I really do think that they make some of the best products out there mount-wise. They always have for a long time now, so really like what they do over there. All right, the next question comes from Thunder Chicken, who asks, can you please explain ballistic coefficient? And I will explain it as best as I know how to explain it. I'm not going to get into the actual science and math behind it. I'm going to give you more of the layman's explanation of what ballistic coefficient is, because that's the way I remember it, and I feel like that's a better explanation. So first off, I want to talk about what Jacob Bynum's definition of that. He's the owner and operator of Rifles Only, and he summed it up pretty much the best way I've ever heard it in terms of ballistic coefficient. I'm going to read a quote that I have printed here just so I didn't mess it up. So ballistic coefficient is how well does a round maintain velocity as it flies downrange, and how well does it resist external ballistics. So external ballistics is everything that happens to the bullet from the time it leaves your gun till it hits something that's not air. So that means basically, I guess what you have is you have barometric pressure, you have temperature, and then the other one was altitude. So those all play into ballistic coefficient. And I'm going to read you some numbers real quick that I have from some pretty common rounds so you can understand the actual number behind it before I talk more about it. So M855, which is green tip, pretty common round in terms of shooting, has a .304 for its ballistic coefficient. Sierra Match King 175 grain, gold medal match, which is kind of the standard in .308 ammunition, has a .505. And then Hornady 50 BMG AMAX has a ballistic coefficient, the AMAX, has a ballistic coefficient of 1.050. So you can see the range is pretty big between a 5.56 round and a 50. So to me, those numbers mean that you are actually giving yourself a bigger target. This was something that I was just talking to a buddy about the other day, and this is probably the best definition that made it click to me. So when you're using a better ballistic coefficient on a round, you need less elevation to reach a target. Now, there's obviously every one of those rounds has a fall off, meaning a velocity that round is going to go transonic, which means that the point that it fires from the gun and is supersonic from the point that it actually tapers off and drops below supersonic speed, which is, I have it written down so I don't forget it, 1,125 feet per second. So when it drops below that threshold, it's transonic, and technically that's when the bullet starts really going crazy, tumbling, veering off course, dropping, all that stuff. So that is what's going to determine the distance that you can get from a round, and that's just really science. The other thing that affects that too is, like I said, ballistic coefficient is, altitude. So altitude comes into play with that too. So I was having a hard time wrapping my brain around this, and honestly, this is what I really loved about learning all the long-range precision rifle stuff, because I really got down into the physics of all this at that Rifles Only course, and I've just kind of really trying to wrap my brain around it and really learn more about it because it's super interesting to me. So I'm still learning about it too. So if I mess something up, throw it in the comments and we'll all learn together. So what I take from that is that when you're at altitude, so let's say we were shooting in Colorado at a higher elevation and then down here in Texas, which is like 800 feet above sea level, the max range for like a 308 is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 yards here in Texas. You go to Colorado at elevation, you can stretch that 308 out into like 1,400 yards. And the reason is because of the pressure at altitude. So as a diver and someone who dives a lot, I equate that to pressure underwater because it kind of helped me realize what that meant, on land too. So when you're underwater, you have pressure that's sitting on top of you. So the deeper you go, the more pressure is on you. It's the same at altitude too. So at sea level, you have more pressure sitting on top of you or affecting the bullet than you would at higher elevation. So the higher you go, the less pressure is affecting the bullet at elevation. So that's kind of the gist of ballistic coefficient in my mind. It's obviously you want to shoot a more superior round ballistically if you're trying to reach out to distance. And the big take home with the elevation thing is, as I mentioned, let's say we were shooting 1,000 yards and I was shooting that with a 5.56, I was shooting it with a 308, and I was shooting it with a 50 cal. That 50 cal would need way less elevation to reach that target than the 5.56 would. And this, I kind of started to talk about this a second ago, but this was a discussion I had that really kind of enlightened me to this whole thing too, is that if you picture a target and, we're back at 1,000 yards hitting this target, that elevation that's going to be required, you're actually giving yourself a bigger target with a ballistically superior round. So it's not going to need as much elevation. So therefore, if you can think about the arc of a bullet that it needs to take on its way to the target, not having as much of an arc opens up more of the target. So if you put a camera on a bullet and you shot it out of a gun and you were impacting the target that bullet is seeing is less with more elevation. So the higher you go and you're coming down on the target, the smaller that target becomes to the bullet. So shooting a ballistically superior round is going to give you a bigger target. So that's kind of the gist of how, I kind of figured out ballistic coefficient and how I think about it. To give you one more example, so the 308 175 grain gold medal match that I was shooting at 1,000 yards needed a MOA of 40 we were in Virginia, so this was obviously a little different than Texas elevation. It's not too far off. I think it's a couple, maybe 1,500 feet difference or something like that. But I needed 40 MOA to reach out and hit that 1,000-yard target, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 33 feet into the air. So that bullet had to be shot 33 feet into the air to impact at 1,000. So that's just one more example of ballistic coefficient, and obviously the higher the BC value, the lower the elevation that you will need to reach out to distance. Okay, so the last question that kind of goes in line with what I was talking about with ballistic coefficient is Kilo 6 Echo Golf Victor, who obviously has a ham radio call sign for his question on YouTube, asks, what's the story with you not liking ACOGs on AR? So in the last episode, I said I didn't like ACOGs when we were talking about it, and I'd like to explain myself because obviously it needs some explanation. It's not just I hate ACOGs, and that's not the deal. The deal is we were just talking about ballistic coefficients, so now you kind of understand why a 308 is a ballistically superior round to a 5.56. Can the 5.56 reach out to long distances? Yes. Plenty of people have taken that round out at distance. But the 308 is more superior, and I don't feel that the AR is a better long-range platform than a 308. So if I had to shoot at distance, I would shoot a precision rifle. Now that I know about that and I got into the precision rifle game and I feel like I've got a pretty good understanding of it, I don't view the AR as a long-distance rifle. Can it take it out? Can you get out to that point? Yes, absolutely. But that's why I don't prefer the ACOG over the Aimpoint. So with ARs, in my opinion, being a more short-range weapon, I don't like a magnified optic. I feel like the ACOG is not as fast to acquire because of the fact that it's not truly parallax free. So that reticle is going to jump around a little bit as you bring it up versus the Aimpoint red dot, which is going to be right there every time because it's parallax free. The other thing is the eye relief. I don't like the eye relief on the ACOG. That's just a personal thing. That's really not a consideration you even have to worry about on the Aimpoint like the T1 that I have here. So that's kind of the gist of why I don't prefer the ACOG over the Aimpoint. All right, guys, so hopefully you enjoyed the explanation. There's a lot of geeky craziness that goes along with ballistic coefficient and getting into the long-range game and precision rifle, but I would encourage you guys to get into it if you're financially able to. It's really expensive to get into, in my opinion, versus shooting an AR. But there's a lot of great things that have helped other areas of my shooting because I've gotten into that. For instance, just the fundamentals that get drilled into you with trigger manipulation, the way you hold a gun, things like that, those have all transitioned and carried over into other avenues of my shooting too, because everything is so precise, thus precision rifle. So I would highly encourage anybody that can get into it to get into it. I really kind of geek out on that stuff. The physics involved behind it is really intriguing to me. So as kind of a lifelong student, it's very cool to learn about that kind of stuff. So anyhow, if you're enjoying what we're doing on gear tasting, please consider joining our membership. We have a crew leader membership that allows us to give you back something in return for helping to support ITS. That link is below. Pick up a gear tasting coffee mug if you're interested in that as well. And again, use the hashtag or pound tag gear tasting on any of the social media networks, and we'll get your questions answered here on the show. Thanks for watching.